Welcome to Lore of the Rings, where we explore the secret paths of Middle-earth and share the stories Tolkien never told. Before we dive in, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from and whether this tale has found you by day or by night. Twilight falls over Mirkwood like a shroud, soft and inevitable. The ancient forest stands wrapped in shadow, its towering trees rising like the pillars of some forgotten cathedral, their branches weaving a canopy so thick that even the failing light cannot penetrate to the forest floor. Leaves whisper secrets here, secrets older than the kingdoms of men, older perhaps than memory itself. The wind carries them through gnarled trunks and over moss-covered stone, speaking in a language that only the eldest among the Eldar might comprehend. This is Greenwood the Great. Or rather, this is what remains of it. Mirkwood now, they call it, darkened by centuries of shadow, corrupted by the malice that once dwelt in Dol Guldur. Yet even diminished, even tainted, it retains a power that mortals cannot easily name. It is a place of beauty and menace intertwined, where the boundary between wonder and terror grows thin as spider's silk. Deep within this tangled realm, hidden from the eyes of those who do not know the secret ways, lie the halls of the Woodland King. Thranduil, son of Orifer, ruler of the Sylvan Elves, dwells here in splendor that belies the darkness pressing at his borders. His halls are carved into living stone and growing root, adorned with jewels that capture the memory of starlight, echoing with songs that have been sung since the elder days. Tapestries woven from moonbeams and shadow hang upon his walls, and his throne, carved from the heartwood of the forest itself, stands as testament to a power both ancient and enduring. Yet for all its beauty, there is something unsettling about the silence here. A quietness that speaks not of peace, but of withdrawal, of doors closed and councils held in whispers. For Thranduil, who has walked Middle-earth since before the moon first rose, has made choices that echo through the halls of history like footsteps in an empty chamber. When the darkness gathered in the east, when Sauron's malice spread like poison across the land, when the free peoples of Middle-earth rallied to stand against the shadow, Thranduil did not march. While Gondor burned and Rohan rode to war, while dwarves and men and elves elsewhere took up arms in desperate defiance, the Woodland King remained in his halls, his armies unmustered, his banners furled. To the chroniclers of the age, this absence was noted but rarely questioned. The great tales of the War of the Ring speak of the valor of Gondor, the courage of the Rohirrim, the sacrifice of the Fellowship. They tell of battles at Helm's Deep and the Pelennor Fields, of the Black Gate and the fires of Mount Doom. But of Mirkwood and its king, there is only silence, a gap in the narrative that some might mistake for insignificance. But silence, in the lore of Middle-earth, is never empty. It is pregnant with meaning, heavy with choices made and unmade, weighted with consequences that ripple outward through time like rings on still water. Why did Thranduil not fight? What counsel did he take that kept him from joining the final battle against the enemy? Was it fear, pride, wisdom, or something deeper still, a calculation born of centuries of experience, of memories that stretched back to wars that made the War of the Ring seem small by comparison? These questions have no easy answers. The records are sparse, the testimony fragmentary. Thranduil himself, dwelling still in the twilight of the Fourth Age before his final departure across the sea, has never spoken openly of his reasoning. Perhaps he sees no need to justify himself to those whose lives flicker and fade like candles in the wind. Perhaps he knows that some truths are too complex for simple telling. Or perhaps, and this is the deepest mystery of all, his choice was not made in the council chambers of his halls or in the strategic deliberations of war. Perhaps it was made long before, in the ashes of battles fought in ages past, in the graves of those who fell following banners into darkness, in the bitter lessons learned when trust was betrayed and hope proved false. The forest knows. The ancient trees, rooted deep in earth that has drunk the blood of elves and orcs alike, remember. The stones of his halls, carved by hands now stilled, bear witness. And the stars above, which have watched the unfolding of all the tales of Arda since the music first sounded, shine down on Mirkwood with a light that is both judgment and understanding. To comprehend Thranduil's choice, we must walk the paths he walked, see through eyes that have witnessed the rising and falling of ages, feel the weight of immortality pressing down upon decisions that mortals might make lightly, but which elves must weigh against eternity. We must enter the silent halls of Greenwood, not as invaders or supplicants, but as seekers of truth, willing to sit in the shadows and listen to what the silence has to say. And yet, while armies clashed beyond the mountains, Thranduil lingered in the shadowed green, the reasons whispered only to the leaves. Picture a chamber lit by the pale glow of elven lamps, lights that burn without flame, sustained by craft and will rather than oil or wick. Upon a table carved from a single piece of ancient oak lie maps of Middle-earth, their edges worn soft by the passage of countless hands, their surfaces marked with roots and realms, borders and battlefields. Here is Gondor, stretching from the sea to the mountains of shadow. Here is Rohan, the broad grasslands where horses run free beneath endless sky. And here, in the northeast, sprawling across territories that shift and change with the seasons, is Mirkwood, the great Greenwood, as it once was called, before darkness settled upon it like a curse. These maps are drawn from many sources. Some come from the archives of Gondor, meticulously maintained by the lore masters of Minas Tirith, chroniclers who have spent their lives preserving the histories of the Dunedain and their struggles against the shadow. Others are elven work, marked with script so fine it seems more like decoration than writing, annotated in Sindarin and occasionally in Quenya, the ancient tongue of the High Elves, rarely spoken now save in songs of remembrance. But maps alone do not tell the full story. For that, we must turn to the texts themselves, the great chronicles that record the deeds and decisions of Middle-earth's peoples. The Red Book of Westmark, primary among them, recounts the journey of the ring and the fellowship that bore it, giving us the perspective of hobbits and the wizard who guided them. The Annals of the Kings and Rulers provides the view from Gondor, the strategic concerns, the political calculations, the desperate measures taken as the shadow grew. Yet when we search these texts for mention of Thranduil and his people, we find only fragments. A reference here to the woodmen and their allies holding the borders of Mirkwood against incursions from Dol Guldur. A note there about the Elvenking sending his son Legolas to Rivendell to bear tidings of Gollum's escape. Brief mentions, marginal notations, hints and suggestions rather than full accounts. This is not accidental. The elves of Mirkwood, like their king, have always been a people apart, separate from the high elves of Rivendell and Lothlorien, distant from the concerns of men and dwarves. They are sylvan elves, wood elves, their culture and customs shaped more by the forest than by the ancient lore of Valinor. They keep their own counsel, maintain their own records, and share their knowledge sparingly. What records do exist suggest a realm under constant siege, not by armies that could be met in open battle, but by a creeping corruption that seeped through the forest like poison through veins. Spiders of monstrous size descended from the spawn of Ungoliant, orcs that crept from the ruins of Dal Guldur even after the necromancer's departure, foul things that shunned the light and bred in darkness. Thranduil's people fought these threats constantly, a grinding war of attrition that consumed resources and lives without the glory or recognition of the great battles fought elsewhere. Tolkien himself gives us glimpses of this in his letters and appendices. He speaks of the woodland realm as being under attack from multiple fronts during the War of the Ring, besieged by forces loyal to Sauron, even as Gondor fought its desperate defense. He suggests that Thranduil's priority was the protection of his own people and realm, a decision that, while it may seem insular to those who view Middle-earth from the perspective of Gondor or the Shire, carried its own weight of necessity and sacrifice. But there are layers beneath even these explanations. The historical consciousness of the elves is different from that of mortals. They do not simply remember the past. They carry it with them, vivid and immediate, as though events of thousands of years ago occurred only yesterday. For Thranduil, who fought in the War of the Last Alliance, who saw his father Orifer fall in the assault on the Morannon, who witnessed the terrible cost of following the banners of Gil-galad and Elendil, the call to war in the Third Age must have resonated with echoes almost unbearable in their clarity. How do we weigh such experience? How do we judge a king who has seen the flower of his people cut down in battles that, for all their ultimate success, left scars that never fully healed? The mortal historians, writing their accounts in the aftermath of victory, might see only absence where there should have been presence. But those with longer memories might see something else: caution born of wisdom, restraint born of sorrow, choices made not from cowardice but from a painful understanding of what war truly costs. The parchment is silent, yet between the lines, a choice trembles, one that may have reshaped the fate of Gondor and beyond. To understand the choice, we must first understand the one who made it. Thranduil is not a figure easily grasped by mortal comprehension. He is old beyond the reckoning of men, having walked Middle-earth through ages that saw the rise and fall of kingdoms, the breaking of the world, the fading of the elves from glory into twilight. His experiences span millennia, and his perspective is shaped by memories that most of the living cannot even imagine. He was born in the First Age, though the exact date is lost to us, one of many details obscured by time and the elves' own tendency toward secrecy about their origins. His father, Orifer, was a Sindarin elf of noble lineage, though not of the highest houses. When the great realms of Beleriand were destroyed in the cataclysm that ended the First Age, Orifer led a migration eastward, seeking lands untouched by the wars of the Valar and the Noldor. He came eventually to Greenwood, where sylvan elves, wood elves who had never crossed the sea, who knew nothing of Valinor save in ancient songs, dwelt in simple communion with the forest. Orifer became their king, not through conquest but through a kind of natural ascension. His wisdom and experience elevated him, and the sylvan elves, lacking the formal hierarchies of the Noldoran realms, accepted his leadership. But Orifer was careful. He adopted many of the customs and ways of the wood elves, blending Sindarin nobility with sylvan simplicity. His court was magnificent, but not ostentatious. His halls were beautiful, but carved from living stone, and wood rather than raised in the grand architecture of Gondolin or Nargothrond. Thranduil grew to maturity in this realm, learning both the lore of the Sindar and the woodcraft of the Sylvan people. He became a warrior of great skill, commanding his father's forces when threats arose. But more than martial prowess, he developed a deep connection to the forest itself, an understanding that went beyond strategy or survival, touching something almost spiritual. Greenwood was not merely his kingdom. It was, in a profound sense, an extension of himself. The Second Age brought new trials. The shadow of Sauron, diminished but not destroyed, began to stir once more. Orifer, ever suspicious of the ambitions of the Noldor and mistrustful of their alliances with men, maintained a policy of isolation. He refused to join the realms of Lindon and Eregion in their dealings with the Dark Lord's fair-seeming emissary. This caution served him well when Sauron's treachery was revealed, and the rings of power proved to be instruments of enslavement. But isolation has its costs. When the last alliance was formed, when Gil-galad of Lindon and Elendil of Númenor gathered the free peoples for a final assault on Mordor, Orifer felt compelled to join despite his reservations. Pride played a role, certainly. He could not be seen to stand aside while others fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. Duty demanded participation, even when wisdom counseled caution. Thranduil marched to war at his father's side, leading a host of woodland elves southward to join the great army gathering at the foot of the Mountains of Shadow. But the alliance was fractious. Orifer chafed under the command of Gil-galad and refused to coordinate his strategies with the High King. When the assault on the Morannon came, Orifer led his forces forward prematurely, eager to prove the valor of his people, unwilling to wait for the ordered advance. It was a disaster. The woodland elves, lightly armored and accustomed to fighting among trees where their agility and speed were advantages, found themselves trapped in open battle against the massed forces of Mordor. They were cut down by the thousands. Orifer himself fell in the first assault, his body lost among the countless dead who carpeted the plain before the Black Gate. Thranduil survived. He rallied the remnants of his father's army, fought with desperate courage through the years of siege that followed, and ultimately stood among the victors when Sauron was overthrown and the ring cut from his hand. But victory tasted of ashes. 2/3 of the warriors he had led south lay dead. His father was gone, his people diminished, his realm left vulnerable and leaderless. He returned to Greenwood a changed being. The carefree prince, if ever he had been such, was gone. In his place was a king, cautious, calculating, fiercely protective of what remained. He rebuilt his realm, strengthened its defenses, and turned inward, focusing on the preservation and flourishing of his own people rather than the grand alliances and noble causes that had cost them so dearly. The Third Age brought new shadows. Dol Guldur, the hill of dark sorcery in the southern reaches of his realm, became a festering wound. The necromancer, Sauron in a form not yet fully revealed, settled there, and his influence began to corrupt the forest. Trees grew twisted and malevolent. Darkness gathered in places where sunlight had once freely fallen. The spiders came, and the orcs, and other things worse still. Thranduil's people fought them, an endless, grinding war that consumed generation after generation of warriors. The forest they loved was being poisoned around them, and they could do little but hold the line, maintaining corridors of safety through the woodland, protecting the northern reaches where their halls lay. Through all of this, Thranduil endured. He was a king of contradictions, proud yet cautious, generous to his own people yet suspicious of outsiders, possessing great wealth yet reluctant to part with it, capable of great kindness yet also of cold pragmatism. He loved beautiful things, jewels, fine craftsmanship, the play of light on silver and gold. Yet he was not consumed by these loves as some were. They were pleasures, yes, but not obsessions. He raised his son Legolas to understand both the glory and the cost of their heritage. He taught him woodcraft and warfare, lore and wisdom. And he passed on, perhaps without fully intending to, his own complicated relationship with the wider world, a mixture of pride in Elven heritage and wariness of the ambitions and follies that had brought so much suffering. And though his hall gleamed with jewels and echoing songs, a shadow lingered, one that would steer his hand away from the battles of men and dwarves. The Third Age drew toward its conclusion in a gathering storm. Sauron, long thought diminished or destroyed, had returned to Mordor and openly declared himself. The eye atop Barad-dûr burned across the land, searching, commanding, orchestrating the vast machinery of war that would test every free people of Middle-earth to their breaking point. In Gondor, the stewards watched with growing alarm as Mordor's strength increased. Orc raids became more frequent and better organized. The lands of Ithilien, once the Garden of Gondor, became a contested no-man's land where only the rangers dared venture. Minas Ithil fell and was transformed into Minas Morgul, a fortress of terror that menaced the eastern approaches to the White City. The Haradrim and Easterlings, ancient enemies, were gathering under Sauron's banner, bringing with them vast armies and the great Oliphants of the far south. In Rohan, the corruption was more subtle but no less dangerous. Saruman the White, who should have been a bulwark against the shadow, had turned traitor, seeking power for himself. Through his servant Grima Wormtongue, he weakened Theoden King, sapping his will and poisoning his counsel. Rohan's strength, which should have been Gondor's greatest ally, was neutralized from within. But while the West trembled before gathering darkness, the East faced its own trials less celebrated in the great chronicles, but no less desperate for those who endured them. Mirkwood stood directly in the path of Sauron's northern strategy. Dol Guldur, though abandoned by the necromancer after the White Council's attack decades earlier, had been reoccupied by his servants. From that dark fortress, Sauron coordinated assaults designed to seize control of the woodland realm and secure his northern flank, while his main forces drove westward toward Gondor. The strategic importance of Mirkwood cannot be overstated. It lay between Mordor and the northern kingdoms, a massive forest that could serve as either barrier or highway depending on who controlled it. If Sauron's forces could sweep through Mirkwood and subjugate its people, they would have clear access to Dale, Erebor, and potentially even Rivendell. The entire northern front would collapse, and Sauron could assault the west from multiple directions simultaneously. Thranduil understood this with perfect clarity. His scouts brought him reports of troop movements, of orcs gathering in numbers not seen since the last alliance, of fell beasts being bred in the pits of Dol Guldur, of dark sorceries being worked to corrupt the very essence of the forest. The threat was existential, not merely to his kingdom's security, but to its very existence. And so he prepared. His warriors trained constantly, perfecting the tactics of forest warfare that were their greatest advantage. Ambush and retreat, concealment and sudden strike, the use of the forest itself as weapon and shield. These were the methods by which relatively small numbers of elves could contest much larger forces of enemies who feared the deep woods and could not navigate them effectively. He strengthened his alliances with the woodmen, the mortal settlements that dotted the western eaves of the forest. These men were not his subjects in any formal sense, but they looked to him for protection and leadership, and in return they provided information, support, and additional warriors for the defense of the realm. He also maintained contact, however strained, with the realms of Dale and Erebor. The relationship was complicated by history. Thranduil had imprisoned Thorin Oakenshield's company and had fought against dwarves and men at the Battle of 5 Armies, even though they ultimately stood together against the greater enemy. But necessity makes strange bedfellows, and the common threat of Mordor overrode old grievances. Yet despite all this preparation, despite the clear and present danger to his own realm, Thranduil did not send forces to aid Gondor when the call came. He did not march south to stand beside the Dunedain, as his ancestors had done in ages past. He kept his armies close, focused on the defense of Mirkwood rather than the grand coalition forming in the west. To some, this appeared as selfishness, a king caring only for his own kingdom and people, unwilling to sacrifice for the greater good. The chronicles written in Gondor after the war, while generally tactful, carry hints of this judgment. There is a sense that Thranduil failed in his duty, that he should have recognized the primacy of the struggle in the West and committed his strength there regardless of his own situation. But this interpretation misunderstands both the strategic reality and Thranduil's own calculations. From his perspective, the threat to Mirkwood was not secondary to the threat to Gondor. It was part of the same war, fought on a different front. If he stripped his defenses to send elves south, Dol Guldur's forces would sweep through the forest, slaughter the woodmen, and establish Sauron's dominion over the entire region. The northern realms would fall like dominoes, and the forces he had sent to Gondor would return, if they returned at all, to find their homeland destroyed. Moreover, Thranduil knew something that the leaders in the West perhaps did not fully appreciate. The war would not be won by conventional military victory. The ring was the true battleground, and its destruction or preservation would determine the outcome regardless of how many men and elves fell on the fields of Pelennor or at the Black Gate. His contribution, he calculated, was best made by holding his position, by ensuring that Sauron's northern front remained contested, that resources had to be diverted to Dol Guldur rather than concentrated entirely against Gondor. It was a cold calculation, perhaps, but it was not cowardice, and it was not born of ignorance or indifference. While the fires of war raged in the West, a silent hand remained still, watching, waiting, calculating. To be an elf is to carry eternity within oneself. Mortals measure their lives in years and decades, their memories fading as time erodes the sharp edges of experience. But the Eldar do not forget. Every moment of their existence remains vivid, accessible, as clear in recollection as the day it occurred. This is both gift and curse. A gift because it allows them to accumulate wisdom beyond mortal comprehension. A curse because it means they carry the weight of every sorrow, every loss, every mistake ever made. For Thranduil, this meant that the War of the Last Alliance was not ancient history, but living memory. He could close his eyes and see his father's face, hear the commands given as they marched south, feel the weight of his sword in his hand as they stood before the Black Gate. He remembered the hope they had carried, The belief that this would be the final confrontation, that Sauron would be destroyed utterly and the shadow lifted forever from Middle-earth. He remembered, too, the reality, the mud and blood of the battlefield, the screams of the dying, the arrows falling like rain, the clash of steel on steel, the desperate fury of hand-to-hand combat where elven grace met orcish savagery and neither gave quarter. He remembered finding his father's body, or what remained of it in the carnage of the first assault, a casualty of pride and impetuousness, of the refusal to coordinate with allies, of the determination to prove Sylvan valor equal to any in Middle-earth. 2/3 of the woodland host had died. 2/3. Families shattered, generations lost, the strength of the realm crippled for centuries. And for what? Yes, Sauron had been defeated, but not destroyed. The ring had been taken, but not unmade. And now, 3,000 years later, here they were again, facing the same enemy, fighting the same war. This pattern, this endless cycle of shadow rising and being beaten back, only to rise again, was the fundamental tragedy of Middle-earth from the Elven perspective. Mortals might take heart from temporary victories, might celebrate the defeat of evil even knowing it would return eventually. Their lives were too short to care about the long term in the way elves must. But for beings who would live to see the shadow rise again and again, victory became a more complicated concept. How many times must the same battle be fought? How many generations must be sacrificed on the altar of temporary peace? At what point does the cost of intervention outweigh